Mustafa! Usak Mustafa! Hicaz Mustafa! Diyarbakır Mustafa! Исфахани Mustafa! С большим удовольствием вам предлагает издали и Шигрели многоуважаемые, абсолютно охуительные, нормальные три Мустафы, три.
This is Lifestyles of the Cruel and Heartless. This week we study the Shah of Iran, the man who originally put the dick in dictator. The Shah's history is as varied and contradictory as the people of Iran's opinion of him. His reign as Shah did not go unchallenged, however, and perhaps history books would have never given him a second thought if not for this man. Would Iran choose the ZZ-Top religious zealotry of the Ayatollah Khomeini, or would Iranians prefer the Shah of Iran's soulless, flamboyant, Elton John-esque style of governing? While he lost this Arabic popularity contest, his influence and presence can still be felt throughout the country. Take a look at the infrastructure of modern Iran. Those museums, mini-malls, and McDonald's franchises didn't come from some guy praying to Mecca 8 times a day. Tonight we explore the life of the Shah of Iran, an influential modern dictator and international fashion butterfly. The Shah, a ruler so pompous and arrogant he'd sentence a man with terminal cancer to death. The Shah, who, due to a medical condition, was known in his country as Achbalu Kafu, the camel with only one testicle. The young Achbalu's origins were decidedly different from those of his father, Raisa Khan, who, in addition to having been born with 2 nuts, was a self-made man and ambitious military leader. He joined the Iranian Cossack Brigade at 14 as a private and quickly rose through the ranks to general through his hard work, award-winning mustache, and by shooting his fellow soldiers in the back when they weren't looking. He finally became leader of the country by winning a national essay contest sponsored by Reader's Digest with his influential essay entitled, "You Can't Spell Infidelity Without Infidel." His father ruled what was then known as Persia with an iron fist and 2 brass balls. Raisa Khan gave his son one piece of advice. "Son," his father told him, "all the world's answers lie in your pants." Later, the Shah would build this statue in tribute to his father. The Shah would also spend years digging his hands into his own pants in search of those answers. Unfortunately, the answers he found could never measure up to the ones his father kept in his pants. This was because, unbeknownst to the Shah, his father always kept a warm falafel stuffed down his trousers. The elder Shah did this to constantly remind himself of one thing: that the economy of Iran would always prosper if it was built on this lucrative Middle Eastern dish. The Shah lived a happy, if not secluded, childhood until the young Achbalu was sent to Italy to attend Mussolini Memorial College, where his father hoped he would learn the fine art of running a successful dictatorship with a minor in mass genocide. Not known for being a good student, the Shah flunked every one of his classes, with the exceptions of fashion design, advanced fashion design, and, curiously, Greco-Roman wrestling. However, the Shah did develop quite a reputation as a party animal on campus. As rush chairman of the Chi Delta Chi fraternity, he was brutal in his treatment of pledges and pioneered the merciless hazing practice of what was called the atomic keg stand. But the Shah was sent home from school early at the beginning of World War II. Iran was caught between the Axis and the Allies, each seeking to obtain Iran's abundant and lucrative falafel resources. Raisa Khan tried to keep Iran neutral, and in an attempt to appease the military leaders on both sides, he sent a letter to Hitler, FDR, Stalin, and Winston Churchill proclaiming that at least there can be one thing in total agreement: we all hate the Jews and the French. But it was to no avail. The U.S. invaded Iran on April 1st, 1943. His father left for exile in South Africa, where he lived the rest of his life. Years later, his last message to his son via international suicide bomber read, "You're worthless and you will never amount to anything. P.S. For the love of Allah, stop wearing your mother's underwear." In his first official act as leader of war-torn Iran, the Shah was called to address a parliament that was anxious to hear what their new ruler had to say. The mood was tense. The power brokers, politicos, and pedophiles were worried that their country was being placed into the hands of an inexperienced child. All Iranians were glued to their radios that day, and those without radios put their ears to the ground. Then an odd hush fell over the parliament chamber.
There's a kind of hush all over the world. Tonight, all over the world, you can hear the sound of lovers' love. You know what I mean, just the two of us.
The young Shah confidently approached the podium, cracked open a can of Schlitz, and summed up his plans for the future of his country with three simple words: rock the Kasbah. And rock the Kasbah he did, with a series of bold social initiatives he enacted to win popular support for himself. One of his first acts was to grant peasant farmers the constitutional right to marry their own farm animals, long a forbidden practice in the country. He refurbished mosques across the nation, upgrading the dirt pulpits Muslim elders preached from with brand new Craftmatic back-scratcher chairs. And he flooded the bazaars and marketplaces with low-cost government-subsidized imports of Pat Boone and Dinah Shore records. Popular approval was not enough for the Shah, however, and he felt incomplete as a ruler, for a king without a queen is like a Siegfried without his Roy. The Shah set out to find himself a wife, and after a series of disastrous courtings, he eventually married the beautiful Princess Fawzia, who was of royal Bavarian and Turkish ancestry, and a second cousin to the Gabor sisters. The regal wedding was attended by international celebrities, political world leaders, and genocidal crackpots. It was said that Pol Pot, Walt Disney, and a young Morton Downey Jr. all drank from the same punch bowl. This was the strongest period of the Achbala rule, and he rapidly became known as the hardest working Shah in Iran. This tranquility was marred by a botched assassination attempt when a Shiite terrorist got past the Shah's heavy security and slipped him an exploding spoonful of couscous. This attempt on his life left both the Shah and the country extremely shaken, for not only had the bomb permanently singed the hair follicles on the Shah's face, thus condemning him to be the first ruler of Iran without a mustache, but it also brought into question the issue of royal succession. Immediately the Shah began the arduous task of having a child. To aid him, the Shah employed a stable of royal fluff girls and had a special erotic film produced. We have obtained a portion of this film. If there are children watching, you may want to ask them to leave the room for a moment. Due in large part to this footage, his wife soon became pregnant and gave birth to a boy, no less. He now had an heir to the throne, and once his son reached a certain age, the Shah planned to nail his son to the throne and pursue his own lifelong dream, a career in America as a professional wrestler. But alas, the Shah's heart was broken, and the Iron Sheikh was denied a bitchin' cage match. During the royal circumcision, tragedy struck when the infant prince was operated on by an elderly Muslim priest with Parkinson's disease. Thanks to shaky hands and a sharp knife, the boy became, for all intents and purposes, a princess and was raised as such. Distraught by this sad turn of events, the Shah traveled to Milan, Paris, and New York, where he threw himself headlong into his first love, the fast-paced, glamorous world of high fashion. With his jewel-encrusted designs, fabrics, and flamboyant use of zippers, he was equally at home designing military outfits for third-world dictators and good friends like Saddam Hussein and Idi Amin, and form-fitting pantsuits for the Hollywood jet set like Sandy Duncan and Liza Minnelli. The Shah was a hit. While he was abroad on his travels, the monarchy of Iran was assumed by this, a portrait of the Shah, and the people cared not, for it was agreed that this portrait was a far superior leader to and possessed a more lifelike appearance than the actual Shah himself. Meanwhile, back in the United States, the flesh and blood Shah was rubbing elbows with heads of state, talking heads, and bald-headed freaks. Presidential Secretary of State and political drone box Henry Kissinger attributed the Shah's popularity in the West to his strong ethnic odor. Back in Iran, an economic split was developing between the haves, the have-nots, and Yakov Smirnov. The rich were enjoying the successes of a strong economy, mostly due to a booming market for falafels abroad, as an entire generation tuned in, dropped out, and got an incredible case of the munchies in that pre-Dorito America. Few of the populace shared in the economic boom created by this export, however. The uneducated and unleavened underclass began to turn increasingly to Shiite fundamentalism for support and answers to their daily problems of eating, drinking, and circumcising their daughters. In 1968, the real Shah was forced to return to Iran to regain control of his country. His portrait, not wanting to abdicate his power, attempted a coup against the Shah, but was unsuccessful and forced to flee the country with his first lady, a velvet Elvis painting. Achbalu, meanwhile, began to combat the Muslim fundamentalists. He sought to modernize his country, much like the Western nations he had seen from his hotel windows and glossy travel brochures. The Shah outlawed the traditional veils and long robes worn by Muslim women and instead forced them to wear lycra bikinis or poodle skirts. And the people of Iran, fearing the Shah, succumbed to this ruling. Then the Shah went even further. The Shah outlawed the daily prayer to Allah. Instead of dropping to their knees while facing Mecca and praying to Allah, the Shah ordered that the population instead spin themselves silly while singing Somewhere Over the Rainbow 3 times a day. Once again, Muslims accepted the law. It was in this politically charged atmosphere that a new leader appeared on the scene, the Ayatollah Khomeini. Known in the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco as the Ayatollah of Rock and Rolla, he was a fervent Shiite Muslim leader and, more importantly, a devoted hashish smoker. The Ayatollah had been living in San Francisco at the time, getting high, spreading the good news of radical Shiite Islam, and spending time as a backup singer and tambourine player in the Grateful Dead. When the Ayatollah heard about the Shah banning the smoking of hashish, he returned to his home country and attempted to galvanize his people through the smoking of big, fat hash joints. Amassing a large power base in his short time there, he was later run out of Iran by his Shiite followers by committing a most horrendous act, bogarting a joint. The Ayatollah, embarrassed and politically weakened, fled to France, a country known for its acceptance of both annoying comedians and dogmatic religious zealots. Fortunately, he happened to be both. With the Shah's legitimacy tested, he conceded to the demands for governmental reform by holding a democratic election between himself and his own hand-picked opposing candidate, this donkey. The Shah, however, lost to the donkey in a landslide defeat, receiving only 2% of the vote. Ever the gracious loser, he immediately suspended the parliament, declared martial law, and shot some people for good measure. The victorious donkey was forced to flee to America, where he settled down in a palatial mansion in Hollywood, married TV sitcom actress Lonnie Anderson, and appeared in a number of successful movies. This was a dark time for the Shah's regime. Martial law returned, people were imprisoned and tortured. During this time, the Shah cut himself shaving, and in a styptic pencil rage he ordered anyone who was not clean-shaven shot dead. In the ensuing horror, millions of Arab women without access to lip wax or bleach were mercilessly slaughtered. To make matters worse, Iran's economy was in a large depression. The biggest cause of the economic downturn was the floundering of the American falafel market, mostly attributed to the death of folk singer Mama Cass, who choked to death on a pungent stew of vodka, stomach bile, and uncooked falafel in 1967. Yet even in these dark times, the Shah had his lighter moments. In between brutal executions and political puppet shows, he wrote, produced, and sang songs with his family in a pop group modeled after the Partridge Family, called The Sands of Love. This video from the song Tracy was shot by the Caspian Sea, and the album rocketed to #1 on the Iranian pop charts, but only because every other group in the top 20 had their vocal cords slit and fingers removed.
Don't say no. Hold me close, Tracy. Never, never, ever let me go. Tracy, never let me go.
I've been playing that for you a lot of years, Tracy.
Later, the Shah was embarrassed in international circles when Shiite Muslim terrorists hijacked the 1975 Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade and forced it to march to Iran. The last straw, the one that broke the camel with only one testicle's back, occurred in 1978. The Shah aligned himself with a man more hated and more reviled across the globe than George Hamilton. Indeed, he invited to Iran one of the most evil men in recorded history. This was more than anybody could stand. The Ayatollah quit the ZZ Top cover band he was in, returned to Iran with some really killer weed, and rallied support for himself and his Muslim political allies. With only swag to offer his country, the Shah was forced to flee Iran for one last time. He packed all he could into 2 small suitcases and boarded this plane. It was said that the only things that kept the Shah calm on that flight was his good friend and fraternity brother Harry Carey, the in-flight movie Smokey and the Bandit, and the silky comfort of his mother's underwear caressing him under his uniform. Unfortunately, America would not accept that plane. Neither would France, the Philippines, South Africa, Guam, or Djibouti. The only 2 countries to accept the Shah were Ireland and Canada. The former because of the plane's fully stocked open bar, and the latter because they thought he was Omar Sharif. Instead, he decided to live the rest of his life here, among the fake rocks of the jungle cruise ride at Euro Disney. In Iran, once the Ayatollah assumed control, the people unleashed a white-hot rage usually reserved for throwing stones at Jews or beating their wives. They tore down the state palace, destroyed Raisa Khan's mausoleum, and they even took some Americans hostage, provoking the greatest inhumanity against mankind. Tony Orlando and Dawn's song, "Tie a Yellow Ribbon Round the Old Oak Tree." The Shah's fate today remains uncertain, and little is known about what happened to him after he went into exile. Some say he worked as the assistant frymaster at a McDonald's outside of Paris before dying of cancer in the early 80s. Others that he was mauled to death in Vatican City by a pack of wild Pomeranian dogs. Still others say that the goofy at Euro Disney has a certain Middle Eastern accent to his laugh and a curious stench of falafel on his breath. Thank you for joining us this week on Lifestyles of the Cruel and Heartless. Good night.
Just the two of us.